So, where we are today, you were invited here with regards to a nice little picture that had this on the page. Everything you should have learned at school but didn't. And as a result, it is going to be everything you should have learned at school but didn't. The education gap, because that's what it is. You may have heard that the education gap exists, but today we're going to find out just exactly what that means. Because if you talk to educationalists, they say they're doing a great job preparing young people for the future. And if you talk to business people, they're saying, we need more. By more, they don't mean technical skills. They actually mean the hardest skills to develop, interpersonal skills. So what does that actually mean? Behind me, you'll see a phrase I use all the time. Can-do people are great performers, but not everyone is a can-do. In fact, the vast majority of people, some say 80, 85%, don't have a can-do attitude. The second part of today is about transferable skills in the new world, communication, negotiation, being a team player. Those are the really important characteristics going forward, not because I'm saying it, actually because the whole business community is saying it, and that includes entrepreneurs. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the value of failure. And at the end of this, you'll get a free chapter to read, which is all about the value of failure. And the last thing is, the whole purpose of this presentation is to help you, your children, be ready for the real world, because the real world's already here. I would like you to think the purpose of education is. And while you're typing that in, I'm going to say that education for the majority of people in the West is approximately 14 years. 14 years, 5 days a day. That turns into 1 million minutes, which sounds an awful lot, doesn't it? But if that 1 million minutes is spent on the right part of education, which enables us to have a fulfilled future life, then we're winning. But what do you think is the purpose of education? We have a long-standing mismatch between the education system and the labour market. Now, this wasn't just said by any person around the world. This was the shadow education secretary in the early noughties, about 2007, 2008. And it's been known by governments around the world that this mismatch is there. We've known it for years. In 1985, I was part of a team that was asked by the then government to suggest what was missing from our graduates from once they qualify. And it was quite clear what was missing: soft skills, interpersonal skills, leadership qualities, be a team player. All of those things that everyone knows about, but they don't do a great deal about. And the education system since then has continued around the world, not just in the UK and not in the West, just in the West, but the education system around the world has focused on qualifications, the certificate. And I'm not saying that those certificates aren't any value, but they're only a third of the puzzle. In fact, some people are saying they're less than a third of the puzzle, but we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So why don't we start from the end? Whenever you're starting a project off, you have an end goal in mind. What do people want? What do employers want? When this was advertised, it was an interactive session. So I would like to know, what do you think employers want? Do they want just certificates, or do they want something else? Has it got you thinking? Have you ever been to an interview? What did employers ask you? Was it on your CV and push it to one side and just asked you questions? Or did they ask you questions directly around your CV? So here's what employers really want. They want people who are professionally qualified to do the job. So at the very highest level, if you're applying for a chief executive's role, then they want to know you've done similar roles in the past. But if you're just starting off in your career, They will know that you haven't got much experience, but they want to see that you're professional. The second thing is they want you to be strategic and operational. So what that means is they need you to be able to see the big picture and then operate interactively at the operational end. And again, they will recognize that you haven't got a huge amount of experience. The third thing is they want you to be adaptive to change. And what that means is a can-do attitude, really quite simple. And the fourth thing is they want you to be inspire and motivate other people. They take it for granted that you can inspire and motivate yourself. Perhaps you can, but actually, perhaps you can't. As we move on through this, this is what we're going to touch on today. This is what employers want. And whilst I would like you to think about what employers want, I'd like you now to think back on the first question, which basically said, what's the purpose of education? Now I'm going to confuse you, because that's what people do. They confuse everybody. So whilst I say employers want can-do people, and I haven't explained what a can-do person really is, but I will do shortly, we're actually talking about employability skills that employers want. And then questions start to come to mind. I've already asked a few questions. What are they? What are these employability skills? How do I develop them? How do I test them? I've been at school for 14 years and I haven't really heard what these skills are. I've just been doing maths and science and a foreign language, geography, history. How do I write a meaningful CV? Am I ready for interview? Do I really know me? Because when you turn up for interview, people will want you to know that you know yourself. So do you know yourself? What about listening, talking, presenting, interpersonal skills, literacy, self-motivation, team working, problem solving, self-belief, self-control, confidence, be structured, be passionate, be focused, be motivated, have aspirations, be inspired, be excited, be challenging, supportive, be responsible, considerate, friendly, calm, and positive. None of those are technical skills. All of those are soft interpersonal skills. Starting to make sense? Well, hopefully this will make sense, because every school in most developing countries, and certainly in the West, know about the top 10 employability skills. And I've put them up there. It's very difficult to read, but just look at the left-hand side, the ones in bold. Communication and interpersonal skills, problem solving, using your initiative. All of these, again, are soft skills. Organizational skills, team working, the ability to learn and adapt. Remember what employers want. Numeracy, that doesn't mean to say you have to be a mathematician. You just need to know about numbers. Valuing diversity and difference, and negotiation skills. Someone once said to me, these skill sets we're talking about, is there any particular order? And the answer is yes. Let's go back to number one. The reason it is number one is communicate and interpersonal skills. If you can't communicate with other people, how can you negotiate with them? How can you work together as a team? How can you listen to what other people are saying? How can you understand difference? How can you work under control, work under pressure, if all you can do is shout at other people to go away, or why haven't you delivered what I asked you to deliver? So there is an order here. And the first one is improve your communication skills. What does all this mean? Well, this comes from the World Economic Forum website. They do regular updates. It's a really good site to go and look at. It's wef.com. So you can go and look at this anytime you like. And I'm going to show you a historic position, because as you can see, we're now in 2022. It's highlighted there as 2020, the skills in 2020. Now, if you look at 2020 compared to 2015, there's not a lot of difference between what's on the left-hand column and what's on the right-hand column. The order changes slightly, but they're very similar in understanding. And as you look down the list on the left, complex problem solving, you learn that through most of what you do in education. But do you know you're learning complex problem solving? The answer for many people is no, they don't. All they do believe is that they're solving something to pass an exam. The same with critical thinking. Creativity doesn't mean that you're really good at design, at art. It means you're a creative thinker. Some people might call that thinking outside of the box. I'm not too sure I understand what that really means, but to think outside the box means you've created the box initially. So the box is your imagination. So if you don't create the box, actually, you don't have to create a problem. You actually keep thinking, keep working, keep exploring, keep expanding, throwing out stupid ideas as well as great ideas. But in an open environment, people will encourage you to keep going and throwing out those ideas. And as you skip down to number 6, there's this phrase, emotional intelligence, which I always find fascinating, because can you tell me what emotion is intelligent? Is there one? My colleagues don't think there is, because it's a great phrase and it's great to understand, but we need to be emotionally competent. We need to be emotionally smart. That doesn't mean to say that I understand and I have the intelligence of passing an exam on everyone's emotions. It means I can be a good team player, have empathy, sympathy when it's needed. Judgment and decision making, it's always talked about, never really understood, but it's moving up the list. And in fact, in 2022, it's number 3, because we need people that can have better judgment and make good decision makers. Negotiation, it's a top 10 skill here, as it is in the STEM skills that we all heard about at school. So out of all these, what particular number has given you food for thought? Because these are the skills that are necessary to move forward and improve your employability, to improve your organization's results. And as an entrepreneur, without all of these, you can't move forward at all, because you need to be incredibly creative. Otherwise, you would never have been an entrepreneur in the first place. I said what I would do was identify exactly what a can-do mindset is. And there are 4 elements of a can-do person. It's how we think, how we feel, what drives us, and how socially connected we are. And all of those 4 things, when they're all positive, you have a can-do attitude. So for thinking, we go on and explain this in a little bit more detail, to be able to think flexibly and appropriately. That may be ripping up the rule book. It may be taking the rules and twisting them a little bit and testing. It may be finding a different way of doing something quicker, better, faster, and coming up with a good result. The next thing we need to be is in control of our feelings. This is our emotional intelligence, if you like. But we define it as being emotionally competent and resilient. So if someone shouts at you and are giving you some really good advice, but they don't really know how to deliver, listen intently, that's being competent. And although they're shouting, you're taking it all in, which is being resilient, because they're saying something which is of huge value to you. The third thing, and in fact, a lot of people will be not surprised to hear this, there's a lot of talk about having a real sense of purpose. So when you do have a real sense of purpose, you're driven by that purpose. So put very simply, if you're going to watch your favorite team play a sport, that's your sense of purpose at the time, and nothing will get in your way. You'll clear the diary, you'll make sure that you've got accommodation at the far end if you need it, you'll get all of your travel in place, and it's as simple as that, really. But in a business, We want you to be really driven by your sense of purpose. And hopefully your sense of purpose is aligned to the business purpose. Because if it isn't, it's a struggle and you won't enjoy what you do. But if it is, actually, it makes life a lot easier because you'll be more engaged at work. You'll be thinking flexibly and appropriately. You will be emotionally competent and resilient because you want the best for the operation. And lastly, it's this social connectivity. So to be able to connect meaningfully with others. What that means is to be able to listen when you need to listen, speak when you need to speak. We are lucky because we're all born with 2 ears and 1 mouth. And if nothing else, that should give us an insight into what being connected meaningfully with others is. We listen, we engage, we think flexibly and appropriately. We're in control of our emotions. We're competent and resilient, and we're still driven on because we want an answer. So hopefully these things put together start to make a little bit of sense. How do we work in a diverse society? How? You've got to have a can-do mindset. If you think you're better than anybody else, is that a can-do mindset? Do you believe that everyone can be equal? I mean, I saw something on LinkedIn recently that said everything about why is it there's women power and girl power, and there's no such thing as man power and boy power. I want now to move into the value of failure, which is a big topic item because a lot of people don't really understand the true value of failing anything. When I was 18, I failed my driving test. All the rest of my family, included all of my cousins, my uncles and aunts, all passed their driving test first time round. I'd never failed anything. I was an A-class student, and when I failed that driving test, I can't tell you how badly I felt. I felt useless, despite the fact of all of the success I'd had. But going through that process means if I'd have understood the resilience I needed from taking the test again, automatically I needed to drive, so I'm bound to take the test again. But I need to know where I failed, why I failed, what was it I was doing where I failed. And there's a great phrase by Nelson Mandela. He said, there's no such thing as failure. I'm either learning or I'm succeeding. And in some respects, if you're learning, you're succeeding. So there is no thing as failure. And what I've put up here is about the light bulb. And I'm sure everyone has heard millions of stories around Thomas Edison. But one of the phrases I know he did say, because it's in a book that's written about him, he said, I've tried everything. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And as you can see, those are just a few of the light bulbs that might have worked or might not have worked. But the nice thing is he kept going. He was persevering. And Edison is an entrepreneur, an inventor, a creator. And like other inventors, what he did have in abundance was faith. Faith and belief in himself that he will find a solution. He wasn't alone, by the way. He did this with lots of other people. But he also had courage and he was persistent. And you can see now how that can-do attitude is shown in the evidence of somebody like Thomas Edison. We know the value of failure. And what I'd like to do is ask people listening and put in the chat box, how long did it take you to walk when you were a baby? Quick answers, guys. How long did it take you? A couple of hours? A couple of days? A week? And whilst you're thinking about how long it took you, how many times did you fall over? How many times did you never actually get your bottom off the floor? So you know the value of failure. But let's go back to the can-do attitude, because you had it when you were a child, when you were a baby. Even though you couldn't read, you couldn't write, and you couldn't talk. You were persistent. You were resilient. And you may have fallen over and hurt yourself. 2 months, congratulations. That could be a world record, actually. But it was hard. but you were driven by that sense of purpose to walk. But my point is, with this one issue, learning how to walk, you have a can-do attitude. You were resilient, you were persistent, you were driven by a real sense of purpose. You were thinking flexibly and appropriately, because when you first started to walk, you probably grabbed hold of anything or anyone that was standing still. So that heavy piece of furniture that you could grab hold of to pull you up. That's thinking creatively, effectively, and appropriately. So you had that can-do attitude. What else did you have? You were determined to do it. When you did it, how did others make you feel? Did you hear them clapping? Did they say, well done? Because now you know the value of success. And even a well done, or, oh, well done, Johnny, you've absolutely won it. You know, that was good enough when you were a baby. And it's as simple as that. The thing is, as we get a little bit older, we forget that we had a can-do attitude. And remember, that wasn't intellectual intelligence at all. This was about the way you did something, the actions you did. And you can recover that tomorrow. And I'll show you how. So let's move on to the next slide. I want to show you the top 10 skills of 2025 now. I mentioned them earlier. As you can see, they're very similar skill sets that were there, but now technology is coming in. But notice where technology does come in. It doesn't come in at the top. It comes in part way down. And if you start to look at these and really investigate what each of these are, the WF have gone one step further, and you can see the legend on the left-hand side where it says the type of skill. So each of these skills on the right fall into the legend on the left. And as you can see, working with people is leadership and social influence. It's the only one on there. But how can you have active learning and learning strategies on an island, in a vacuum, in isolation? You may be good thinking, you know, when no one else is around, but the active learning needs a team. So again, all of these here, a majority of them are interpersonal skills, really fundamental to learning them and growing with them. But going back to the very first slide, the education gap is that all of these skills that are needed for the 2025 and for the future, they're not taught in school. We hear about STEM, but we hear about STEM subjects. We don't hear about the STEM activities which improve your communication skills, improves your analytical thinking, improves your complex problem solving. Because in chemistry and physics and biology and maths, and indeed in English, you are dealing with complex problems. What do you think Shakespeare was thinking when he wrote that sonnet? My English teacher used to say it, you know, nearly 40 years ago. So in fact, nearly 50 years ago. That's how old I am. But they don't turn that into the fact that you are solving a complex problem. They're making you think. They're making to use your brain. So these are, again, World Economic Forum, great website, the top 10 skills. And now what I want to do, I want you to do some homework. So as part of this webinar, we're going to be sending you the first chapter in PDF form, The Value of Failure. So this is literally one person's chapter. In the book, there are 26 chapters and there's 2 large appendices. Every chapter is written by a different person, with the exception of 2 chapters which are written by the same person. It was such a good response that I decided to split her chapter into 2. So this first chapter you'll read, and indeed don't just read the chapter, read the reason for the book, read the preface, read the foreword about what other people are saying, because we One thing that we're always going to be hit by is failure. To an A-star student, a C is failure. So how do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it professionally. You deal with it by investigating the gap between why you're an A-star student and why this particular piece of work was a C. What was missing? Now, the interesting thing is the really good teachers in this world will tell you. My teachers would have told me, and they put it in red, so I couldn't miss it. So I get my work back. There were no computers in those days, by the way. It was all handwritten. So I would have to interpret what the teacher said. And there could be 5 or 6 bullet points about to get better, I need to do this and this and this and this in the next piece of work. But do you do that with yourself? When you've done something and you didn't quite get a great result that you were expecting, did you go back and analyze it to say, here's where I could have done it better? And next time, that's exactly where I'm going to focus, because there's always a next time, no matter what you're doing. And as you go through all of these processes, wherever you are, whether you're still at school or you've just finished university or you've been in a job for a long period of time, reflecting on what you've done helps you improve what you're going to do. That doesn't mean to say you dwell in the past, but as someone once said, understanding the past makes us a better person in the future. I think that was Winston Churchill, by the way, but many other people have said it. So our gift to you is chapter 1. You will have all my contact details. And indeed, as soon as you start to read these chapters, you'll see that there are 26 other people that have contributed to this first book, which is about your soft skills, the importance of soft skills, and the importance of a can-do attitude. So every chapter has that as its ultimate topic. And it's come from quite a lot of different people, some very experienced at the top of their career, some just starting their career. So we brought in all walks of life. It's approximately a 50-50 split between men and women. So there'll be a chapter for everybody that wants to read it. But please just read this first chapter, The Value of Failure, which is ultimately your starting point. Because if you can deal with failure, you can deal with anything. It's not easy for people to say that or believe it. But trust me, I've been through more failures than successes. And without the failures, I wouldn't have had the successes. That is an absolute, final curtain. But remember, when you were learning to walk, you probably failed 100 times, if not more. One person put down a year, I guess. Every day you were trying to walk, you failed. So that's 364 times you will have failed. But without those failures, you would never have succeeded. So it's a pretty simple thing to get hold of. And it's definitely going to improve your emotional competence and resilience. Might even improve your emotional intelligence if you're that way inclined. So we've come to the end of this session. I hope it's fulfilled what it set out to explain to you so that you can understand exactly where you're going. This could be and might be very new to a lot of you listening, but don't worry about it. Other people have contributed to this particular book and they're there to help you move on. This isn't the only book, by the way. Volume 2 is currently underway. And that's another subject that we don't teach at school, money and finance. It could be anything from budgeting down to forecasting to the importance of having a relationship with money. So again, it's another big subject, but for the moment, get yourself on the first rung of the ladder. Start educating yourself. Start moving forward slowly. Baby steps, remember. Going back to when you first learned to walk, baby steps. You know, at 15 or 16, you may be an international athlete. Who knows? But it all started with exactly the same baby steps that I took. and everybody else takes. So I hope you've enjoyed this little session. It wasn't to answer every question. And in fact, when you get to the end of chapter 1, it's to ask more questions. And the answer you've got to give is about who you are. Be honest with yourself, because if you can't be honest with yourself, you'll never grow. There's no point in thinking that there's an answer at the end of the book, because there isn't one. The answer is what you see, how you view life, how you want to move forward. And once you understand all that, the world's your oyster. You can do anything you want to do. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it was educational. I hope it was entertaining in parts. And more importantly, it's up to you now to be engaged and take it to the next level. So thank you very much. We'll now open it up to everybody for any questions. Hopefully, I might have a few answers for you. I see a questions come through. What gives most value in your life? That's a really good question, because where I am, what gives me most value is being around my grandchildren. I've only got 2. That's what gives me value. Nobody can be put in the way of time with my grandchildren. I know that time's precious for, you know, my sons. So more importantly, when they're available, I need to make sure I'm available. So if you like, flipping back to the can-do attitude, it's being emotionally resilient and competent, thinking appropriately. So whenever I get an opportunity to see my grandkids, then yeah, that's something I hugely value. Another thing I hugely value is other people learning. I've got to the age of my life where a lot of people says, well, you've learned all you can. And the answer for that, as far as I'm concerned, is I've still got a thirst for knowledge, for understanding. Only knowledge that's relevant, you know, to what I'm doing. And it all comes out of asking people, you know, what are they doing? What do they do to succeed? How are they making a living? What's missing? You know, if they could do anything in their life with no budget constraints at all, what would they do? That has huge value to me, to find out how other people succeed, which is my biggest learning from failure. Well, it has to be learning how to walk. It took me the longest. I don't know whether it was 4 months, 5 months, 7 months. I have no idea. I can't remember that far back. But that was my biggest learning, because I learned to be resilient. I learned to be competent. I learned to fall over, and even though I've hurt myself, I learned to control my emotions. Because when you do fall over, boy, does it hurt. When you do get a kickback to say, no, we don't want you for interview, or no, we don't want you for a second interview, or no, you failed. It taught me all of those lessons that ultimately today are really important. Does that make sense to everybody? What was your biggest learning? What was one thing that we've said during this webinar that's a takeaway for you? What one thing are you going to take away? Okay, we've got one. Taking failure in a positive sense. Yeah, absolutely. Just like Edison. Every experiment was a result because it got him closer to the success. So if you take life as every experiment, I mean, life is an experiment. You can't be an A-star student all the time, and all C students could improve. I can see something on the ticker that's desperate to come out, and it's shot across. Keep learning new skills. That's really important. But do you know which skills you're trying to learn? And do you know how you're going to do it? Because it's great having a target, but the most important thing is, which skills are you trying to learn? And more importantly, How are you going to do it? And why are they important? So if these skills are really important to you, that's going to drive you on. Write that down. Wake up to it every morning and just say, I'm going to do that today because. And don't say, because Neville Gaunt told me to do it, because frankly, that isn't motivational. It wouldn't be motivational to me. It needs to be motivational to you. It needs to be important to you. Always have a can-do mindset. Absolutely, I can do it all. No, you can't. Okay? So it's a can-do mindset doesn't mean that you can do it. It means you're prepared to give it a go, just like you did when you started to walk. I go back to the baby analogy all the time because people say, I haven't got a can-do mindset. And I said, oh, do you crawl around everywhere then? And they look at me as though I'm stupid. And I say, well, without a can-do mindset, you'd never learn to walk. So when did you have that can-do mindset? It's that inner belief you can do it, but you may not know how. So the journey is working out how and going to the end of the journey. You know, bite-sized chunks, have a goal and then bring it backwards to what that means to you today. What do I need to do now to fulfill that goal? I'm not a great believer in goal setting because what that means is it's quite fixed. Whereas I believe people should be flexible, as we say, to think flexibly and appropriately. I equally don't believe there's any such thing as a plan B. It's always plan A. And if I need to make adjustment, I'll make adjustments. Because if you've got so many plans, it's quite difficult to remember all of them. Whereas if you've got one plan, you'll make it work. We're expanding the horizon here, and I appreciate it wasn't what we started off with, but this is about that having that can-do attitude. Because without a can-do attitude, you'll never be an entrepreneur. There isn't an entrepreneur out there that I know doesn't fulfill all of the criteria of a can-do attitude. That doesn't mean to say they'll win. It might mean that they'll fail. But failure is just another learning curve. Maybe it's not the right time. You've heard a lot of things about the right time, the right place, and the right idea. Well, sometimes you can have all three and it still not work. But the guarantee of success is a can-do mindset. Because at the end of it, even if it doesn't work, you'll have captured all of that journey, all of those experiences, brought it to yourself, recognized and learned a lot more about who you are, and you'll take it on to the next journey. It's all about your journey, not mine. It's all about your journey. And that's why this is so important for young people to realize life hasn't stopped after school. Life continues right the way through. And if you're in a better place at the beginning of your life and you continue to ask questions, because one feature, I'll let you into a secret as long as you don't tell anybody. One feature of a can-do person is they ask lots of questions. Think about that for the moment. Think about this presentation. Think about what I keep asking you. Think. It's your brain, not mine. I can't put my brain into yours. Frankly, you wouldn't want it. But you need to grow yours. So I hope that's been enlightening for you. As I said, hopefully educational, maybe a little inspiration, a little engaging. And now you've got homework, which, if you recall, is just reading one chapter. And by the way, is free. The whole book's free, but take the first chapter, see where you go, see how you improve from it. Because I'll guarantee you will improve, but only if you answer the questions at the end of that chapter. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at a future date.